Hello and welcome to another week of TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive. Today is July 2nd, and we've got a great show today. Later on, we're going to have an interview with Ben Siegel, candidate for Massachusetts 4 Congressional District and Brookline resident. But before that, I'd like to run through the last week's changes in government, local and state, and occasionally federal. I want to start with town meeting. Town meeting began 9 days ago and wrapped up 2 nights ago. When it was dissolved, all of the things passed in town meeting go into effect. And so I want to run through them quickly, beginning with Newberry College. Newberry College was sold to a developer. The land was, and the developer's well tower, they want to build housing for older adults, including memory care and some other sort of healthcare services, light healthcare services, and that was approved. Part of that includes funding for affordable housing, and there was a question as to where that affordable housing would be built. Would it be built on site, or would it be used elsewhere in town? And town meeting decided to put it elsewhere because I believe the thinking was that it would create more affordable housing units if done elsewhere. And the expectation is that the $6 million will be used in conjunction with some other funding to take the 60 units of older adult housing at Colonel Floyd and upgrade that to a 100-unit set of buildings for older adults with some really important upgrades like community rooms and no longer requiring the residents to walk stairs to get in and out of their homes, something that's certainly not appropriate for housing for older adults. Additionally, town meeting voted to acquire West Campus, more specifically voted to give the select board the authority to acquire West Campus, one of the parcels associated with this package. And if the select board proceeds with that, they would likely put it on the ballot in the form of a debt exclusion, but that's all TBD. The town meeting in a separate vote also voted to authorize the select board to sell the Oak Street properties. These are 3 townhouses that the town purchased about a year ago, maybe a little more, in order to expand the footprint of it allowable for a public school proposed in that part of town. That school was not ultimately approved, and I think town meeting felt that owning these 3 townhouses no longer made strategic sense, and selling them now gets the cost of the debt service off the books, allowing the town a little more flexibility in its budget. The other very important thing the town meeting did, of course, was approve the budget. It's a tough budget because revenue is down, more so than in many other towns. Parking meter revenue is down, parking ticket revenue is down, marijuana tax revenue is down, hotel tax is down, restaurant meals tax is down. And so even though property tax stays at about the same level, these other cuts in revenue are really sharp. There was an important and really heartfelt debate about whether or not we should fund the police department at the levels that were proposed, or whether or not we should reduce some of that funding and apply it to other areas that the town also values. So this wasn't, this was really, in my view, a case of, given that we don't have as much funded as we want, how do we best spend the money for short-term and long-term benefit of our residents? And there were 2 amendments, the Brown-Bastian Amendment and the Ananian Amendment. The Brown-Bastian Amendment proposed to cut the funding for the police department by about 17% and reallocate that money into schools, into public housing, into public health, social workers. That amendment failed about 25% to 75%. The Ananian motion proposed to cut the police funding by 10% and reallocate that money similar to, as I described before, obviously smaller dollar amounts. That failed 40% to 60%. And so ultimately there was a very small cut in the police budget, and that will be used to fund some work by committees to think about really what we expect from our police department and our police officers, and whether or not the services that they are being asked to provide would best be provided through some other form of government or non-government. And that's a discussion that the town, I expect, will have over the next year or more, and really benefits from input from the public, particularly the public that isn't always speaking up, but who has particular experience on this issue. And so if that's you, I really encourage you to chime in. If you're not sure how to do that, you're welcome to get in touch with me. As always, here's my information. 617-872-8921 is my telephone. Tommy.vitolo@mahouse.gov is my email. Please contact me anytime about COVID, about police reform, about anything that's on your mind. I may be able to help, and I will do my best if I can. So that's the town update. I also want to give you some update from the State House. This past Tuesday, the House passed 3 really important bills, very different from each other. The first was a conference bill, meaning that if and when the Senate passes it, the language would be exactly the same. It'll go directly to the governor for signature or veto, about the 2020 September 1st primary and November 3rd general election. Here's what the law says. Number 1, everybody can vote by mail in both elections. Number 2, everybody will be mailed an application for a ballot for both elections. Number 3, everybody can go online to request a ballot for either or both elections. Number 4, there will be early in-person voting for both the primary and the general. And number 5, there will certainly be in-person voting on election day in the primary and the general. This is a really important bill. We had early voting in the town of Brookline for the town election. It was imperfect because it was new and it was in the middle of COVID and staffing wasn't maybe where it needed to be. This bill provides plenty of time for town clerks and city clerks to ramp up, as well as for the Secretary of State to provide additional support. I have no doubt that will happen. I'm very excited about this. I think it's a really important step for democracy under COVID, and I'm hopeful that some of these reforms are then voted next session to become permanent. The state legislature, the House specifically, also voted a transportation bond bill, $200 million for roads and bridges. This is the same amount that the legislature has passed in prior years, which sounds maybe pessimistic, maybe optimistic, right? It would have been nice if it were bigger for municipal budgets. On the other hand, it didn't get smaller at a time when state revenue is far down. And so Brookline gets about $1 million out of that directly into its town budget. And that will help a little bit, not a whole lot. The town was expecting to get most of that anyway, but it certainly provides some certainty and will help maintain that budget. Incidentally, the House passed a $300 million transportation bond bill several months ago, just before COVID shut down Massachusetts. The Senate has not passed the revenue necessary for that bill, and that's why it's only 200 instead of 300. The House had passed a revenue package that included a 5-cent gas tax, a tax on Uber and Lyft rides, and a tax on corporate businesses, particularly those with large amounts of revenue. But the Senate hasn't passed it, so we don't have the money to increase the transportation bond bill, which would put more money in the budgets of cities and towns to fix roads and bridges and sidewalks and crosswalks and bike lanes and all of these parts of transportation that municipalities handle. So we got the 200. My expectation is that the Senate will do the same, and that's not a bad thing. Finally, the House also passed a really important bill that was filed by my first-term colleague, Liz Miranda from Boston, and long-term member of the House of Representatives from Newton, Cape Cod. And it focuses on the reality that if you are a Black or a brown woman, your health outcomes associated with maternity and birth are far worse than if you are a white woman. And that is a problem. Exactly the causes and exactly the solutions are complex and numerous. And this bill will form a committee with some real teeth to work on this and try to understand how this structural racism can be undone in a way that improves health outcomes for Black and brown women, and hopefully for white women as well. The idea is that getting pregnant in such a wealthy and well-educated and doctored up area like Massachusetts should be problem-free whenever possible, and it hasn't always been that way, particularly for Black and brown women. And this seeks to fix that. So that passed the House. It's not clear if the Senate will take it up or not, but I was proud to vote on it. And then finally, Governor Baker, along with governors of several other New England, New York, and New Jersey states, have set up a travel requirement. In the case of Massachusetts, the others are similar. If you are traveling into Massachusetts from a state that is not one of the 6 New England states, New York or New Jersey, you must quarantine for 14 days. That is the official statement, position, policy of the governor. But must is in quotes, and I'll tell you why. When someone flies in to Logan Airport, we know from where they came. And if it is in New York or New Jersey or an airport in New England, we know they came from out of this region. We know their names. We know where they're going to be when they get off that airplane. But we are not in any way, shape, or form communicating this requirement with them, following up with them, ensuring that they're abiding by it, or having any sort of punishment or remedy if they're not. And so I hope that people who are traveling in abide by this 14-day quarantine. I doubt anyone will. I think that this is an example where the governor has the right policy in place nominally, but in practice isn't doing enough to keep the Northeast's very low COVID numbers declining while the rest of the country goes up. I think it's a real missed opportunity. But must quarantine if you're coming from outside of New England, New York, or New Jersey for 14 days. And if you have a family member or a friend who's doing that, I really, really encourage you to crack the whip on them and say, no, this is what you got to do. Our health of our community, of our Commonwealth is too important. And so hopefully we'll see at least some of that. Without further ado, here on Brookline Interactive Group, we've got candidate for Congress in the Massachusetts 4th District, Ben Siegel, coming right up. Stay tuned.